UK, bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know, Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry. This is Dewbs Co. Coming up tonight. Now, there'll be a couple of events that many of you will never forget. The horrific killing of Lee Rigby and the Manchester Arena bombing. Now, today marks the anniversary of birth, and I'm wondering, in the UK, when it comes to extremism, are we in a better place or not? And when it comes to MPs in this country, are we expecting them to operate at the same standard to us? Are we being a little bit deluded? What do you make to things like Suella Braverman trying to get a one-on-one speed awareness course, Rachel Reeves flying business class, etc., etc.? Are they like us, or should they be different? And low traffic neighbourhoods, do you live in one or near one? Is it time we scrap them? It seems now we can't even find evidence that they even reduce mileage. What's the point in them then? And another search for Madeleine McCann, which involves British police, about to commence. Now, I say this with a heavy heart. I am a mum to a child that's not too dissimilar to the age that Madeleine was when she went missing. But many children go missing in this country. Is it time now to almost draw the line when it comes to time invested and funding? Should there ever be a line or not? Do you just continue forever and ever? You tell me. We'll have it all to come, but before we do, let's bring ourselves up to speed with tonight's latest headlines.
Michelle, thank you. Well, the top story at 6:01 on GB News tonight, as you've been hearing, a new major search for Madeleine McCann will begin tomorrow. Portuguese police will search a remote reservoir on the Algarve, which the main suspect in the case used to frequent. The area is about 30 miles from the resort in Praia de Luz, where Madeleine went missing in 2007. The search is expected to last 2 days. Well, in news here at home, the Home Secretary says she's confident there was nothing untoward in the way she handled a speeding offence. Suella Braverman is accused of asking for a private speed awareness course to be arranged after she was caught speeding last year. If it's true, it could be a breach of the ministerial code. The Prime Minister's spoken to his ethics advisor, but there's going to be no inquiry. Earlier, the Home Secretary didn't deny asking civil servants for assistance.
Last summer, I was speeding. I regret that. I paid the fine and I took the points. But we're focused now on delivering for the British people and working for them.
Did you ask civil servants to put you on a one-on-one speeding course?
In relation to the process, I'm focused on delivering for the British people, do my job as Home Secretary. What I will say is that, in my view, I'm confident that nothing untoward has happened.
Well, the Shadow Public Health Minister Andrew Gwynne said Suella Braverman must go.
Look, I've got real frustration here about this because at a time of a cost of living crisis that people want real answers to, at the time that our NHS is on its knees and needs fixing, we're here yet again talking about another Tory minister who has sought to bend the rules, play the system for their own advantage. Of course, she needs to face an ethics advisor. I would go further. I think Rishi Sunak needs to show some leadership and show her the door.
Well, Labour has warned today that the NHS won't survive another Conservative government. Setting out his vision for the National Health Service, Sir Keir Starmer promised to get the NHS back on its feet if his party won next time. He pledged to reduce NHS waiting lists. He committed to hitting the 4-hour A&E target, as well as improving ambulance response times.
At the next election, the NHS is on the line. The Conservative Party that's brought it to its knees will put it in the ground. But mark my words, if all we do in the Labour Party is to place the NHS on a pedestal and leave it there, that's not good enough either. We've got to fix the fundamentals, renew its purpose, make it fit for the future.
Now, the Princess of Wales has been telling children at the Chelsea Flower Show that you have to work hard to be a royal. Pupils from 10 schools were lucky enough to be joining the Princess for a picnic at the annual event. She was asked by one child what it meant to be in the royal family and what does the royal family do. She replied, "We help, we support all kinds of different people in the country and we showcase their amazing work," adding, "You have to work hard being a royal." Now, nearly a third of young survivors at the Manchester Arena bombing received no professional support, with a new report out finding their experiences weren't validated by adults in positions of care. 22 people lost their lives when a suicide bomber detonated his device at the Ariana Grande concert 6 years ago. The report showed 3/4 of children at the event were mentally affected by the attack, but professional support wasn't offered to them in 4 out of 10 cases. There's a warning out today over the number of new sophisticated scams doing the rounds. The consumer group, which says at least 4 are currently on the go. They include fake PayPal accounts, a missing persons appeal and fraudulent app alerts. The government plans to work with Ofcom to use new technology to reduce the number of scams. And just lastly, a bus driver from Devon has cashed in on a £1 million prize from a lottery scratch card. Steve Goodwin picked up the winning Bank the Cash ticket in South Devon whilst he was waiting for a kebab. The lucky winner says he's going to use the money to buy a house and he plans a few holidays, but he also says he'll keep working. On TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app, this is GB News. Back now to Michelle.
Thanks for that, Polly. I loved that last story about the winner of £1 million. I love the way he sits there and goes, yes, I'm definitely going to keep on working. Would you keep on working if you won £1 million? I'm fascinated to know your answers. And you might start off saying, yes, I'm definitely going to start working, keep working. And then if I came to meet you again in, I don't know, say 5 years' time, would you still be grafting or not? I'm not sure if I won the lottery, I would carry on working. No offence if my bosses are listening. I think I'd dedicate my time, I don't know, perhaps full-time charity work or something like that, because I do think it's nice, isn't it, to have a little bit of structure about your life. Anyway, let me know what you would do if you scooped the jackpot. Jo Phillips is a political commentator. She's alongside me. Alan Miller, the co-founder of the Together campaign. Very quickly, I ain't got all day, I'm not supposed to be talking about this, but I couldn't resist. Would you work if you won the lottery?
I would carry on working, I think, yeah.
What, because you'd like to come in here and sit next to me?
Well, I'd definitely like to do that, but I think that we can be of service and make a contribution to things. It's not all about money.
You're a good man, aren't you? Would you carry on working?
Yeah, keep busy. I mean, maybe charity or something, but keep busy. I couldn't do nothing.
Yeah, I think I'd set up a foundation to help people that was really struggling and do that full time, because I do. What's that saying? The devil makes work for idle hands, doesn't he? You wouldn't want any of that, would you? Anyway, get in touch with me. Your thoughts on all of that to come tonight. gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email as usual, or you can tweet me at gbnews. But tonight, on to more serious matters, of course. It's been 10 years to the day that Fusilier Lee Rigby was murdered on the streets of Woolwich in East London. Many of you will remember that horrific, well, I've got to say that image will never personally leave my mind, that is for sure, and also something that I will personally never forget, and I'm sure I'm not alone. It is the 6th anniversary of the Manchester Arena bombing today as well. And since then, of course, we've had other attacks, and we have dealt with these conversations often about when it comes to extremism in this country, where are we at these days? Are we in a better position than when we once were or not? Joining me tonight is Major General Chip Chapman, former head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence. Good evening to you. Chip, I'll pose that question directly to you. When it comes to extremism in this country, are we in a better position these days than we once were?
Well, you can have aberrant views without being someone who's going to take part in a terrorist attack. So if you take the metrics of are we at more of a threat from terrorism, The answer is probably no. That's a different question. If you say, is community cohesion as great as it was? And the answer to that is probably no as well. So both those things can be true at the same time. But the metrics of terrorism coming out from Lee Rigby, for example, would probably tell you that we're in a better position than we were then, because partly geopolitical events worldwide have conspired against the terrorists. That's the fall of ISIS, the decapitation of Al-Qaeda, all those sorts of things, along with, if you look at the metrics of the number of arrests now, they're down significantly from what they were sort of 5 years ago. The length of sentences for those who were arrested for terrorism offences, most of them are for under 4 years. They're to do with dissemination of terrorist publications. But at the same time, there are worrying statistics as well. So the number of investigations remains pretty constant, somewhere between 600 and 800 investigations. That doesn't mean they'll all go into plots and into terrorist attacks. The number of attacks is down. The number of plots, because the benchmark is taken from March 17, which was the Westminster attack, is 37 plots since then. So over the last 6-year period, that's 37 plots which would have gone into executive terrorist action if there hadn't been external intervention by counter-terrorist police, MI5 together.
And what do you think about, for example, criticism of things like Prevent? We see countless reviews into that, a lot of criticism coming its way. Where do you stand on it?
Prevent is a good thing. Prevent is always going to be criticised by those who oppose it, particularly those who are of an ideological extremist nature, most particularly on the Islamist side, because they see it being against them, and they'd like to see all terrorist legislation rescinded because that would further their strategic cause. So the fact of safeguarding vulnerable people at a young age, because there is a young cohort to this, is something that should be applauded. You don't hear about the successes because there are safeguarding issues which are confidential, but Prevent does a very good job, and it needs to be supported. And we had the Shawcross review recently. It's also not true that there's a causal link between those who refer to Prevent and the Channel programme and a linear progression towards being a terrorist. That simply is not true. They're separate processes and procedures which happen if you're on various pathways. So just because you are on Prevent does not mean you're going to become a terrorist in 5 or 10 years' time.
Interesting stuff. Chip Chapman, thank you very much for your insight there. Joe Phillips, what do you make of some of this?
Well, I think it's interesting what he just said, that we don't hear about the successes. And of course, do we feel safer? Would we feel safer if we knew how many plots had been thwarted? I mean, Chip said 37 since 2017, but that's probably a small number compared to other things where there's been more intervention. I mean, if you think back to, and many of the viewers and listeners will remember what it was like when we, on mainland UK, mainland Britain, were living under the constant threat and worry of an IRA terror attack. And, of course, we've had terrible things. You mentioned the arena bombing, Michelle. We've had the London Bridge, Westminster Bridge, Borough Market, Liverpool Women's Hospital, the Dover Migrant Centre. And, of course, we've had the murder of 2 MPs in their constituencies, Joe Cox and David Amess. So it hasn't gone away. But I think what is interesting is probably the wrong word, but there seem to be more lone wolves, if you like. That makes them sound, romantic and good, which is not what I mean to say. But I think there are more people working alone, certainly in those cases, some of those cases I've mentioned, than organised terrorism. But I think, it's very difficult. How do you make the public feel safe while at the same time ask people to be aware and report something that's untoward or suspicions they've got?
Yeah, and if there was like a mass event, like a mass gathering or something, would that cross your mind in terms of attending huge,
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we all thought about it, of the coronation, the Queen's funeral last year, any big events like that, even the Eurovision Song Contest in Liverpool, or football matches, the FA Cup final. All of those things are in an inherent risk. But, as we know from those incidents, people just walking over Westminster Bridge, people walking over London Bridge, stabbed or mown down. There's no rhyme or reason. I mean, I think, what Chip Chapman was saying, that the security forces, security services and the police have got much better tools now. And I think probably, internet, social media, that sort of stuff is probably a much better guidance.
Yeah, and I do think also as well there is a need for honesty, when we're talking about prevent and things like that. And I think sometimes people are so afraid when it comes to political correctness and all the rest of it, because the Shawcross review, one of the things that I found quite interesting was it saying that the facts, and I'm reading directly because I don't want to be in trouble for misquoting, of course, the facts clearly demonstrate the most lethal threat in the last 20 years has come from Islamism, and that threat continues. Then it goes on to say prevent must address all extremist ideologies proportionately according to the threat each represents. However, Shawcross is saying his research shows that the present boundaries around what is termed by prevent as an extremist Islamist ideology are drawn too narrowly, while the boundaries around the ideology of the extreme right wing are too broad. It does not allow prevent to reflect accurately and deal effectively with the lethal risks that we actually face. I found that quite interesting. Alan Miller, your thoughts?
I think that obviously it's important that diligence and behind-the-scenes investigations continue, and that's important work. I am concerned that we've got a mixture of things that has happened. So on the one hand, we haven't addressed the hearts and minds, the values, the virtues of what's so great about Britain historically. Much of the kind of denigrating, the hatred, this kind of self-hatred that I think was actually reflected back towards us with the nihilistic terror attacks that wanted to attack anything that was about our way of life, almost like a reflection of our own disgust with ourselves. We've done nothing but rape and pillage. There's nothing great about history. The nation state is often mocked, and the victories of history are often presented in this whole litany of terrible scourges that we've done, and it gets reflected. And I think we haven't addressed that issue in terms of hearts and minds and ideas and what's great about things. So there's still a potential for some of those things to be there. In fact, we flatter them too much. I also think something else has happened that's very interesting and concerning, because the commentator was talking about cohesion in society, and what we've seen much more is an extremism of a refusal to allow civic engagement. You can't say that. People saying that actually, if Nazis come out, we can kill them, and they're comparing people who talk about sex-based rights, talking about gender, as being Nazis and fascists. So if they say that a woman is a woman and a man is a man, you can't... You have to be very specific and clear about that. Say that's a Nazi or you're far right. We've seen comments like that, not just in America, but here we've seen women being attacked at protests, not just in New Zealand, but here. And Speaker's Corner, we've seen a reluctance to engage in that type of thing. Extremism where people will throw things at you. They'll say you should have things done to you if you say certain things around issues. And not just on the campus, but in everyday life. But equally, I'm concerned that there's an overstretching of the state in all these things. So I don't think it's right that the state attempts to limit what we say. I think we have to be able to say, if there's an issue in a certain community or a group, that we can have those discussions openly and scrutinise them, that we allow people to be offended and insulted, actually, with freedom depends upon it, and that we don't start calling people who are extreme with their ideas politically as terrorists necessarily. You might have a radical idea about reorganising the economy or about providing it's peaceful and it's legal and free. Because we've seen in America where the discussion about Antifa, where they're saying, well, perhaps we should make them a terror group because they've attacked people. You've got laws already that exist for that kind of thing. So I think we need a proportionate discussion. But I am very concerned about the fact that the extremism that's becoming a bit more prevalent in society, you can't say things and you actually use violence to shut people down you don't agree with.
Yeah, and a lot of people, by the way, when it comes to things like, just stop oil and all the rest of it, a lot of people will get in touch with me and say, these guys should be categorised as as eco-terrorists, and a lot of people use the definition of terrorism and apply it to some of their behaviours and say, well, how about including that group and campaign and all the rest of it within the terrorism definition? So I don't know, sometimes it feels like not enough people are perhaps being described as terrorists that should be, and then the boundaries on the other side are getting quite wide in terms of who other people want to put into that bucket. You tell me your thoughts on that.
Well, I think what Alan says is absolutely right, that the language that people use from across the political spectrum can be vile, can be offensive, can be threatening, and can be downright frightening. But at the same time, and I agree with Alan, you know, you don't want to take up, you know, desperately short resources of going to the police, or should you go to police and say, oh, somebody said something nasty about me on Twitter? It's about striking the balance, and a lot of it, I think, is about how we educate and engage with young people. So Alan and I were just talking outside, Michelle, about, in fact, about the sort of stop oil and that sort of stuff. And it's about engagement. And what we were saying is that actually, if you want people to come around to your way of thinking, you need to engage with them, not to say you're either with me or against me. And that seems to be the polarisation. It's so black or white, for or against. You're a Nazi, you're not, you're a terrorist. And we need to look at the language, I think, that we use.
And I do get what you're saying, and I think particularly in things like, you know, the gender stuff, you know, polarisation, we can bring people with us, but the harsh reality is in this society, there are people who literally hate our way of life. They do not like what we stand for. They want to do everything possible to undermine what we stand for, and they will stop at nothing, in some cases, as we very sadly experience, you know, trying to kill people, trying to amend, modify, restrict our way of living because they do not like it. And unfortunately, a lot of those people, they value dying in the same way as many of us value living. And I think when you come to those people having a nice rational conversation and all the rest of it and trying to find points of agreement, I think people are way too far gone for that. But what do you make to it all? Get in touch. GB Views at gbnews.uk is how you can reach me. I'm going to have a quick break. When I come back, some of your responses on that one, but also we'll all be familiar by now. Work with Suella Braverman. She's been in trouble again, and I do labour that point again, because part of me cannot help but wonder, do people really actually care about this speeding thing, or is it just the latest example of people trying to give her the boot because they don't like some of the other stuff that she's saying? I'll let you be the judge of that. I know certainly what I think. But anyway, when it does come to MPs, are we a little bit deluded? We're sitting here saying, look at Rishi in his helicopter, look at her trying to get a one-on-one course, look at her with a business class flight. So what? Wouldn't we be doing that if we were in their position? You tell me. See you in 2.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Dewbs Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians
her task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock. Joe Phillips is alongside me, the political commentator, as is Alan Miller, the co-founder of the Together campaign. Good evening. Earlier on at the start of the programme, I was talking about lottery winning, and I was asking you, would you carry on working if you scooped the jackpot? I'm referring to that fella that just won £1 million and said that he would. Jeanette says lottery winners shouldn't take jobs off people that need them. Oh, oh, Jeanette. Jack says quit work if you won £1 million. Surely it depends what job you've got and whether or not you love or hate it. Actually, I'd say it depends where you live, because if you're in London, for example, £1 million, it'll sound a fortune if you're elsewhere, but £1 million, that'll get you, I don't know, some tiny little box flat somewhere.
Garage in Acton.
Yeah. So I guess it's just, and also what kind of life do you want as well? If you want to have the a life of an MP, if you want to be on your helicopter, if you want to be on your business class flights and all the rest of it, you're not going to go very far with your £1 million in a place like London, which brings me nicely. Do you see what I did there? I know. Hey, I'm getting better at this. It only took me 2 years. I'm getting better. I'm getting better, everyone. But yes, of course, I refer to Suella Braverman. She is in trouble again. You will have heard about this perhaps at the weekend. Caught speeding. She then requested a one-on-one speeding course through the civil service. Everyone, of course, going absolutely mental about this, and all kinds of calls for investigations and this and that and the other. On the flip side, you've got Rachel Reeves. And sometimes I can't get my head around what people, I don't know if people are a bit thick or if they just don't think things through properly or what. She put a picture on Twitter, I think it was, of a flight ticket and a passport. I mean, I don't know why people feel the need to do this, but anyway, she put a picture of a flight ticket and a passport saying she was off to New York to try and sort out things like the digital economy, but following the plan, she left a seat number on it, which was 3K. Business class, Club World, whatever you want to call it. A lot of people are up in arms about how expensive that was. And, of course, you've got things like Rishi Sunak. He's been in trouble for getting helicopters here, there and everywhere. It got me thinking, I don't know if we're being a bit deluded as members of the public, because you sit there and you say, oh, look, she's doing this and he's doing that and all that. Well, if you were Suella Braverman, why wouldn't you try and get a one-on-one speeding course? Of course I would.
But don't do it through your civil service. I mean, that's her problem. It's not about the speeding. It's not about whether she was going to do a one-on-one course or whether she was just going to, suck it up, take the points and pay the fine. She shouldn't have asked the civil servants to set it up. She should have got a lawyer to try and sort it out for her.
But then people had been crying because if she had then offset the cost of the lawyer, and why wouldn't you just ask?
Why couldn't she pay for the lawyer herself? It's... Oh, what actually, why...
So who would the lawyer have asked?
Apparently, according to a lawyer who has been quoted quite a lot over the last couple of days, it is not uncommon for people in the public eye to have one-on-one speed awareness courses. So it's not completely out of the blue, but it does seem a bit ridiculous to ask the civil servants to deal with something that is not to do with her role as Home Secretary, or at the time she was the Attorney General. It's about process, Michelle, and it's all about perception. The perception of Rachel Reeves sitting in business class flying to New York, although apparently that flight was paid for by a Labour donor and will be declared in the register, but it makes people think they're hypocritical. Rishi Sunak using a helicopter to fly to Southampton. Again, it's about perception. Here's a Prime Minister who is fabulously wealthy. Did he need to go by helicopter? He could have caught the train, or he could have gone, if he was really pushed for time, he could have gone somewhere a bit nearer. And we've got James Cleverly, the
I know, but
Foreign
I think people are
Secretary.
just being a bit deluded, because it's like, at the end of the day, this is the fella that's in charge of running the country. He's got a lot to do. Yes, of course,
Well,
he
then
could have
don't go to
wandered off to the ticket office, and he could have got this train, he could have stood in the queue, and he could have got his transfers here, there and everywhere. I mean, come on.
But nobody's going to expect the Prime Minister to queue up and get a ticket to Southampton. He could have gone somewhere nearer. James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, who's abroad in the Caribbean at the moment, is using a private jet that costs £10,000 an hour.
So your issue with the Suella Braverman thing, for example, is not what she's done. It's the fact she used an admin person within the civil service to look into something.
It's not their job.
Alan?
I think what we're seeing is that, on the one hand, the trivialisation of a really important position in public life, where rather than the content of their policies and hearts and minds being won over, we're being distracted effectively by some of these things which are really quite ridiculous. I think also that within the civil service there's a concerted effort to upend and topple elected representatives, which is very disingenuous and problematic, and there is an issue in the civil service, in my opinion.
I can hear people shouting at the screen going, when you say elected, they'll be shouting at me, Rishi Sunak, we didn't choose him, that's what they'll be shouting.
Well, you know, she's elected as a member of parliament. I mean, the point is the civil service are not elected at all. And that we've seen a concerted politicisation around some issues, and it's pretty incontestable that whatever anyone thinks about it, many people disagree with her views in the civil service and around her, but much of the British public agree with many of her views, and we're seeing limits to what people in power can actually do on the basis of having had a mandate on these things. But I think there's another thing which is really important, which is the relationship to the public. We're in a cost of living, cost of lockdown crisis, inflation. So it's not so much perception, there's a reality that many people have faced. Many of these people have been responsible for having implemented things that are now causing these issues. The relationship to the public is one where they're often detached and they don't understand many of the issues, and that is an issue. And the thing about the public, and we didn't, on the last thing we didn't finish off, was many of the public actually intervened in those terrible terrorist attacks, and they were very brave. And the public should always be at the forefront of this. And I'm concerned that on the one hand we've got a trivialisation of politics and what needs to happen, the really important issues that need to be addressed. And rather than winning hearts and minds and convincing the majority of people, we've got attempts to change voting patterns and ages and everything. What we see is this attack on this basis, and I just think, are you joking, right? She takes some points versus going on the course. Are we? Is this what we're spending our time talking about when we've got the issues that we're facing right now?
But in a way, that her lack of judgment, Alan, underlines the point you're making. You know, this is a woman who.
But could Suella Braverman do anything right in your mind?
Suella Braverman makes me pine for the compassionate heart of Priti Patel. I mean, Suella Braverman, I think, has shown some terrible errors of judgment. She was forced to resign from Liz Truss's brief government for sending out email. I mean, this is a woman who's held the highest legal office in the land. This isn't like any of us three suddenly being going, OK, you're Home Secretary, Alan, and you don't know how it works. She was sending, secure emails from a private email address, so she had to resign. Now, you may question, as I would, Rishi Sunak's wisdom in reappointing her, certainly as Home Secretary. He could have got her in the Cabinet on a different job. This is about an error of judgment. And you're absolutely right. It is completely... It's minuscule.
No, but I don't mean to be rude, but, so what? I think people are sitting here, and honestly, there's so many things going on in this world. You might have seen Labour today, by the way, talking about how they're going to fix the NHS. I was going to talk about that, and then I just thought, you know what? It's so ridiculous. If you're going to fix the NHS, why don't you go start in Wales, where you're already in charge of it, demonstrate how you mean to go on there. And by the way, why don't you actually accept your role, to Alan's point, in some of the damage that you actually caused to the NHS with your demands for ongoing lockdowns. But anyway, I digress. I just think it's all a little bit ridiculous. I think it's political posturing. I think it's people who, they don't like Suella Braverman. They're going out of their way.
Suella Braverman has been around long enough, Michelle, as an MP and as a politician and as a cabinet member to know how the world works. If you see something like this coming, you've been caught for speeding, you just pay it. You know,
Why?
and then it goes away.
Oh, come on. Right, I'll ask you at home, because I need to go to break in a second. Right, look, if you got done for speeding, honestly, don't be telling me any fibs now, because I can tell, right? Honestly, would you not try to do what you could to minimise the impact to your future driving career?
With a
legally,
ministerial car.
of course. I'm saying legally. I'm not condoning, of course, anything that's illegal, but I'm just asking you an honest question. If this was you, wouldn't you try to do anything possible? I don't know. You tell me. GBviews at GBnews.uk. When I come back, I'll have some of your responses, but I also want to talk low-traffic neighbourhoods. Do you live near one, in one? Do you celebrate them, want more of the things? Or do you think, pack it in now with your control? See you in 2. I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, alongside me Joe Phillips, the political commentator, and Alan Miller, the co-founder of the Together campaign. Dave says, Michelle's just said, so what, in a question to the Suella-Braverman conversation. He says, this just shows how stupid Dewbs is. She is a pathetic moron. Thank you, Dave. That's very good.
That's nice.
But you don't deter me. I stand by my position. I think, so what? Everything that's going on in the world, pack it in, trying to bring everyone down on any desperate little tiny little measure you can get them on just because you don't agree with what they're saying. I think it's a bit embarrassing, really. And I think we should have better things to think about in public conversation. But hey, that's my thought, and you are very entitled to disagree. Let's talk low-traffic neighbourhoods, shall we? They've basically been accused of greenwashing after the Department of Transport said there's no evidence that the schemes reduce the number of miles people drive in their cars. Listen, I'll cut to the chase on this one. I'll go straight to you. Are you a fan of LTNs? Do you think we should have more of them, less of them, or what?
I'm not a fan of LTNs. Road closures, we should call them what they are, which is road closures, are an attack on our mobility and our freedoms, which have come in undemocratically during the emergency powers, primarily under COVID, when there have been consultations, often don't go to the majority of the people who are residents. And when they do go out and they get the responses, the majority usually oppose them, but they go ahead anyway. And we've seen this from funding from central government and implemented with local authorities, and groups like Active Travel, UK 100 have been pushing all of this, with this international group, C40 Cities, all intertwined. And basically, when people say, oh, you know, local people should make decisions, we're seeing these technocratic impositions that are nothing about extending life. If you want to extend life, everyone knows the way you do that is you improve wealth for people, you improve housing, you transform their relationship to the world that way. You don't limit and restrict and impose. It's a cash grab, but it's also limiting people, all sorts of people, disabled people, women at night who want to get cabs, our ability to move freely. When did we agree that we would give up our ability to move around freely? It's like going back to feudal times where there are tolls on our movement. And in certain places, like in London, in Hackney, they're saying 3/4 of the roads will be closed, and in Islington, 70%. But we've seen great pushback and challenges to these things in Oxford, in Bath, and in a number of areas. And I think what's interesting, Michelle, with this is that ordinary people in Britain are saying they're not going to put up with it. We've seen many challenges. And actually, the government now has just pulled back on funding any more of it in the livable streets. So that's a good thing. But we are also seeing, quite disingenuously, a lot of attacks on ordinary people, calling them names for actually asserting their interests. And I think that's a real concern.
If I remember correctly, which I think I do, you was on here the other day, Joe, saying that you wanted to pedestrianise all town centres and
no,
stuff.
not all. What I
think
did
you
say,
did. I'm sure you
no,
said
I
all.
said there are some towns that are just not designed for traffic. And actually, it was with Connor Tomlinson, who went to university in Canterbury, near where I live, and that was the example I used. I mean, I'm in favour of less traffic because I think people need to have cleaner air. I think they need to be able to walk and cycle, but please don't cycle on the pavements. Children need to be able to go out. And I think one of the things that COVID did show us was the desperate need for people to get outside. I think Alan is right that, you know, these have been imposed in areas without adequate consultation, and certainly that seems to be the case. But I would certainly welcome anything that reduces traffic in town centres.
But these things,
but a
when
lot
you've
of
looked
these
at
are
the
in
mileage.
residential areas, aren't they? Well, I don't know that was ever the matrix. That was never going to be the definition, or if it was, it's a silly definition, because it's not about cutting down driving. It should be looking at, is it improving the chances of people going outside or feeling more able to walk or cycle or let their kids play on the street?
Yeah, but I mean, anyone that lets their kids play on a road, I mean, or near a busy road, I mean, there's something, you know, you're not quite right, really, are you? Because that's not where you let your kids play. You let you take your kids to parks or quieter areas. You don't let them play where there are cars, surely.
But this is to make more quieter areas so you don't have to trek all the way to the park.
Well, you see, that's not what they say. What they say is that this is about the environment. They say that this is about reducing traffic on that basis. Mehdi Kolban in Hackney has said that we're going to make life as difficult as possible for people. If you're in retail, if you're Middleton Road in Haringey, your 100-year shop, retail, hospitality are having to close. Similarly, on the Cowley Road in Oxford, you mentioned Canterbury. The previous planning officer, the vice planning officer, said this is close to Stasi imposition. There's no need for these traffic measures.
But that was a ridiculous zonal thing that they wanted to do.
I think the thing is that they make assertions that we're in this permanent state of crisis and emergency, a bit like COVID. Everything's a permanent state of emergency. Be quiet. We're the smart people. We're going to do this to you. We know what's best. We're going to make these grand declarations about people's health or the environment, and then we're going to just do it anyway. And it's this technocratic imposition that is to do with both money on the one hand, so Haringey Council in 3 months made several £1 million from it. The residents and businesses don't want it, and it's an affront to us, and it reflects this contempt, I think, that people have for the public. If we want people to actually live healthier, longer lives, then that is all about helping create dynamic growth. Another really unfashionable thing now, which is productivity, wealth creation for everyone. For that, you need roads, you need dynamic dynamism, you need more house building, you need to have an upbeat approach to economic wealth creation. And this is all about limits and restrictions under a dubious, flawed notion of net zero, which is a policy imposition. It's not about actual different innovative ways to deal with issues. It's we must do this by this deadline. And this is what we're seeing. We're now seeing a situation in our country where roads are being closed, we're threatened with power cuts, a lack of energy and spiralling prices. This is what this actually means around net zero, and this is one of the key parts of it.
Well, if we just go back to the low neighbourhood traffic zones or whatever they're called, I mean, the thing about consultation is the thing that really bothers me, and I think that's the point that Alan's touched on, that, you know, councils, if they want to, and I mean, I know I tried in vain, Michelle, to get you to vote in the local elections, and I
got
know
no interest.
And no, but you see, this is the sort of thing where people need to be engaged. They need. It's no good saying, "Oh, well, we didn't want it. Nobody asked us." Somehow or other, local people are the only people that can stop this. The thing you mentioned in Canterbury, actually, that led to the loss of the City Council and the loss of the seat of the former leader who had proposed this bonkers idea of... Even Jacob Rees-Mogg said it was a bonkers idea to bring zones into Canterbury. But I think, you know, it is about... We've all got to be very vigilant about what is being proposed. And one of the really sad things is the demise of local papers and local information, and local radio, where people used to get this knowledge.
But everyone says it's really sad about the demise of local media. So, for example, newspapers, which I agree, by the way. But then when I ask people, so did you used to buy a local paper then? People look at me daft. Well, did you used to buy your local paper?
Well, yes, I did. And I used to work on local papers. But, you know, you knew what was going on. And there was a legal requirement for things to be put in the local paper. Now, you know, there is no legal requirement for a new planning application unless you are on the adjoining side of that planning application. So I think, you know, I think what is going on is dodgy in terms of consultation. And I would say... You've got to take note of what's going on in your area. Look at those notices on lampposts. You know.
There you go. That is the moral of the story.
Boring.
Joe wants you to be walking around reading lampposts, everybody.
But if you don't get involved and you don't know what's going on, you're not in a position, your argument is so much weaker, because you need to be able to say, you know, 89% of the residents in this said, we don't want this.
Well, Lee, he's not mincing his words. He says, I'm so sick of this. Please, will you tell Jo if she wants to walk or cycle or get out more, she's free to do it. He puts it in capital, so it means business. He says, I do not want to, so I should be free to choose not to do that and to get in my car if that is what I choose. What do you make to it all? After the break, listen, I want to talk to you about a potentially sensitive subject for many of you, I suspect. Madeleine McCann, you know, another search is about to commence involving British police. I'm wondering, and please, this will send that viewer off into the edge. You thought I was out of order with Suella, so you won't like my views on this next one, I can tell you, but I'm asking, is it time to draw a line? Should there be a cut-off point in terms of funds, police time, etc., in searching for Madeleine McCann? You tell me. See you in 2.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, alongside me Joe Phillips, the political commentator, and Alan Miller, the co-founder of the Together campaign. Carl on Twitter says, this whole Suella Braverman thing is a non-story, it's simply a civil service which on continuing their onslaught onto ministers they don't like or who they disagree with. I think many people would agree with you on that one. Carl on Twitter says, I drive an electric car and if I want to sit in traffic, that's my right. I pay for my car and all the taxes. Why are non-drivers so obsessed with what drivers are doing? I don't know, you tell me. Someone who calls himself The Bear on Twitter says, I know I'm old-fashioned, Michelle, but surely roads were created so people could travel on them. Oh, you dinosaur, you. Pack it in. Right, let's move on to a sensitive story for many of you, I am sure. Madeleine McCann, 16 years ago. I cannot believe it was that long. But anyway, of course, we all know the story by now. And another search is about to commence, this time for a reservoir in Portugal. It was about 30-odd miles from where she went missing. It's imagined that British police will be involved in this search. Joe Phillips, this is quite a sensitive topic for some people because, of course, it's a little girl and, you know, gosh, if that was your child, you'd want everything to continue.
Yes.
But when it comes to taxpayer resources, police time, cash, etc., should there be a limit or not?
Well, who's going to set that limit? I mean, the problem is, and you're absolutely right, it is, if it was any of our children, we would do anything possible to try and find out what had happened to them. But yes, 16 years on, £13 million, and still no nearer to finding out what happened to that little girl. I mean, she would have been 20 this year. The little twins, her brother and sister, are 18. You know, you can't even begin to imagine what the family has been through with false hope, false leads. And of course, you know, I think we can all agree there was probably some bungling at the beginning, which lost valuable time and lost valuable leads. But Madeleine McCann is not the only child that's gone missing. There are tens of thousands of children who go missing every year, who don't have the same media profile, who don't somehow capture the public's imagination and the desire for a happy ending. And I don't think we're putting the same resources into finding them.
Alan?
I think that on that last point, that's the thing. I mean, not only are there people that have gone missing very tragically, we also saw the story of the 13-month-old who very tragically died in Portugal, the same place, because of sepsis and not being able to get to things quickly enough, and the problems of a different country and what that means, and the way Interpol, the different European police states work together or don't, all of those things. And in our own country, where people are getting burglarised or they're getting attacked, the police can't seem to come. They do come sometimes when people put a post on social media. It does seem to me as well that you know, there have been many things that have not had this high profile. If we look at how mainly white working class girls, maybe they were the wrong type of people, were not discussed in terms of the grooming gangs, the attacks on them in Rotherham and many other cities around the UK. Where were the police resources in addressing that? There are still many people who are not being held accountable for that. So I think that in that context, yeah, it's we need to the police need to address the key things that they've got to be focusing on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be very direct on this. I've got a little boy who is not too far off the age that Madeleine McCann was when she went missing. Just for the record, I wouldn't choose to leave my child somewhere while I went out to socialise with my friends somewhere else. But not saying anyone deserved that to happen, but I do sometimes think, you know, there are thousands of children that go missing. I found the name of a little boy, I'd never really even heard of him, Daniel Entwistle. He was 7. He went missing Great Yarmouth 20 years ago. They found a bike and nothing else. I've never even barely heard that little boy's name, and I do wonder whether or not there's a class element to some of this, because I was at a caravan park in Skegness the other day. If someone left their child in the caravan while they went to the clubhouse socialising, and something terrible happened, would that get the same response, the same investment and all the rest of it? And as a mum, you would never give up. And I accept and understand that, but perhaps when it comes to taxpayers' money, maybe there should be a limit.
But somebody's got to make that decision.
People make tough decisions all of the time. I'll leave you to ponder it. What would you decide? See you tomorrow.
Hello, it's Aidan McGivern here with your GB News forecast from the Met Office. Clear spells for many of us overnight, a cool night to come, but more warm sunny spells are expected in many locations this week. The weather set fair with high pressure in charge, that high pressure extending from the west, bringing a breeze in from the Atlantic but over the top of the UK. And for some eastern coast, that means the winds will be travelling over the North Sea. That's why it's stayed a bit cooler for some North Sea areas. And we'll continue to see that breeze overnight, but actually for many it's light winds, low humidities inland, and a lack of cloud will mean temperatures dipping into the single figures, even the low single figures in a few sheltered spots in the north. So a bit of a chill in the air first thing Tuesday, but really it won't last long because plenty of sunshine will warm the air up from the word go. And we keep those sunny spells into the afternoon. I think there'll be a bit more cloud at times compared with Monday. Certainly across southern areas, that additional cloud will mean that temperatures will be a degree or two lower, 21 Celsius, the likely max. Elsewhere, mid to high teens generally, but for Scotland and Northern Ireland, the cloud thickens through the afternoon and there'll be a spell of patchy light rain and drizzle crossing northern Scotland during the afternoon, pushing through Shetland by evening. A break then in the cloud and the rain, but further light drizzly rain comes along into the far northwest later on. A few light showers for Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland by dawn on Wednesday as well, but clearer skies further south. And again, under those clear skies, light winds, temperatures dipping into the single figures. So another fresh start for southern and eastern parts of the UK, less so further northwest where we've got thicker cloud to begin things on Wednesday. And a weak weather front crossing Scotland will bring an area of cloud for a time, along with some light drizzly showers. That clears through, plenty more sunshine to come on Thursday and into Friday.
It's all about family.